We'll make a start, I think. Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you and appreciate you making the time to come along to this webinar on helping young people as they start to be aware of climate change and as they think about climate change. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in a couple of different areas. One of the main areas that I work in is private practice, where I work with young people directly coming in, often talking about their concerns for the climate and what they're worried about. I also write some books and treatment development using a model called DNAV that I developed along with Joseph Cherokee. And DNAV is a developmental model of, well, it's really a developmental model of contextual behavioural science, but we call it a developmental model of acceptance and commitment therapy too. Just because sometimes that's more helpful to people and they understand a little bit more about what we're talking about. So today we're going to have a look at how DNAV can help young people with climate anxiety, really. And I don't know how you all feel, but I see a lot of young people coming in to the clinic who are really concerned about what's happening with the climate. And I'm equally concerned. So I'm glad you've taken the time to come along and join the webinar. And I know that you're as concerned as I am because we had 400 people sign up to this webinar within a few hours. And we didn't have space for 400. So we're going to post view it. So for those people who missed out, we're going to make a post view. And people will be able to watch it afterwards. That said to me that this is a really important thing for you, and in some ways I was encouraged. It kind of helped me know that you was as worried about it as I was, and that you cared about young people as much as I do, and that you saw them coming into your clinic or your space that you work in, or that they're young people in your home, and that you're worried as much as I do. So when I started to dig into the work on climate change, and it's been a couple of years now, really when we started developing DNAV and we started talking about the discoverer, and I began to look at the ways in which young people discover and change the world. And I'm going to talk a bit about that today. But that really started to help me see the action that we take, and particularly the role that young people have in taking that action. And so, of course, over the last year, it's increased even more. And our concern about what's going on has increased. And some parts of this webinar will be predominantly Australian focused. Not all of it, but some parts of it. But I think you could generalise to other issues as well. So what we're going to do with the webinar is I'm going to talk with you. It's not a lesson on DNAV. If you're new to DNAV, it's perfectly okay. It's not a lesson on it. It's more of a practical kind of focus at looking at how a young person might present, what we might do to help them. And there's really a message of active hope in here too. When you start looking at the research and start looking at what's actually happening around the world, there is, it's hard to say this out loud, but there is much to be encouraged by. And you'll see as you go through that there are so many things happening, and every day when I turn on my computer and there's something else happening. So our job is to help young people see that as well. So we're going to do a little bit of a walk around, and as we do the talk, what I would like you to do is use yourself as an example. So rather than think about a young person, I think it brings it closer to home if you use yourself as an example. So we're going to work on ourselves as an example and then use that information for helping us work with young people. So we're going to start with looking at, if you're familiar with DNAV, you'll know that we call this the DNAV disc. And this has a lot of information on it. We use it for case conceptualisation and treatment planning. Or really, we use it to look at where the young person is at and how we might help them. So I want to simplify it, but we're going to come back to this. But what I want you to do is I want you to grab a piece of paper and on your piece of paper, I want you to carve up 3 spaces, just like we do with advisor, noticer and discoverer. And I don't want you to worry about all the little text that I've written there. Just put a V in the middle. And as we look at this next couple of slides, in the space that we call the advisor, you don't have to worry about the technical terms and what it means, or we'll come to that. But what I want you to do is I just want you to write down the kind of talk that you have going on in your head as you hear the next part of the talk that I'm going to share with you. So just some thoughts that come up, anything that comes up, I just want you to make a note. And in the part that we call the noticer, I just want you to write down anything that you become aware of inside your body as we move through the next little bit of the presentation. And in terms of your behaviour, you might not have anything to write in your patterns of behaviour as you watch, but maybe you'll notice that there's some things that happen to you. And so just in the spaces that we call D, N and A, I just want you to use these loose definitions, your patterns of behaviour, your bodily sensations, and your self-talk. And just make a note of what happens as we begin this first part of the talk. And where we're going to begin is we're going to begin with a really difficult thing to talk about, but we actually have to tell it like it is. This is very consistent with what we do in ACT work. You'll know when we do ACT work that one of the first things we do is we open up and we look at exactly where we're at, even if it's really painful. And we kind of have to do that in order to help young people, because many of them have a better idea of where we're at than we do. So firstly, we're going to tell it like it is. And as we do, I just want you to make some notes of what you become aware of. Somebody has said to me, will the slides be sent to us? Yes, I'm going to send you the slides, and it's got all the links in it, and we're going to send you a post recording of the webinar as well. And so I'm just going to do this first section, and then we're going to stop and I'll look at your questions. So let's just begin with telling it like it is.
You are too scared of being unpopular. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and a living planet. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done, rather than what is politically possible, there is no hope. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. Then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly. No matter how uncomfortable that may be. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not.
And then we make a change!
The real power belongs to the people.
I know that's difficult to watch, but we need to set the context, and we need to begin by actually being aware of and knowing what it's like. So at the moment, this is data from the Australian Psychological Society's surveys that they did last year. 95% of Australian young people believe that climate is a serious problem. 4 in 5 are anxious. 4 in 5 think their quality of life will be reduced forever. 1 in 6 have sleep difficulties. And 3 in 4 feel like they're not being taken seriously. So our job is to tell it like it is first. Not tell the young people we work with, but tell each other and talk to each other. If you're not aware of the data, I'm not going to spend much time on this, and I promise you this webinar will get more hopeful as we go through. But just in case you're not aware of the global temperature rise, it's data that's reported and established and supported by all the world's scientists. And there you can see the change in temperature and how rapid it's changed since the year 2000. I'm sure you've heard that we're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction, and you can see here the time interval and the cumulative loss of species and how quickly it's increased in the last 100 years on this slide and this slide. And if the effects are not addressed, then the climate change will mean a rise in sea levels. No one really knows how much. Some estimates say 7 metres. Increasing deserts, wildfires, water shortages, crop failures, extreme weather events, billions of people displaced, and actually the latest data suggests 1 billion climate refugees, disease and increased war and conflict. Most of what we need to talk about is about fossil fuels and corruption. Where we are is driven by the greed, where 1% of the population are blind to the ecological limits of our Earth. And so under here, these, when you get the slides, these are all hyperlinked. You'll be able to follow the data if you want to follow the data. The biggest contributor to climate change is fossil fuels. 50% of the temperature rise and 1/3 of sea level rise. So we need to be aware that just stopping to use plastic bags is not going to be enough. There are 20, it's useful and important, but it's not enough. There are 20 companies that produce 1/3 of all emissions. 20 companies. Fossil fuel companies spend billions lobbying political parties. And in the US alone, $2 billion. Oh, I've lost the year there. Australia is in trouble here too, but it's really hard to track the data and find out how much is being lobbied to political parties. The fossil fuel industry gets huge government subsidies, up to 5.2 trillion in 2017. The media support this, and they support fossil fuel companies and billionaires. And one clear example we have is News Corp, that currently controls 70% of the press in Australia and openly deny that climate change is a real thing. So where this leaves us is that traditional ways of communicating the science has failed. The science is clear, but traditional ways of communicating it has failed us. This is I'm quoting from a recent Lancet dialogue. The climate crisis is one of the greatest threats, or is the greatest threat, to the health of humanity. A 2% or higher rise in global mean surface temperature is an acute danger to our health. And traditional methods of scientists writing the reports and talking to conferences and trying to deliver it to policy and to politicians and to the media has failed. The evidence suggests it's failed, because if it had succeeded, we wouldn't be where we are. The UK's, this is a quote from Lancet, the UK's scientific community, along with scientists in most high-income countries, is simply doing too little to engage civil society and politicians in their struggle for climate justice. So we also know that relying on traditional advocacy methods hasn't worked, because if it had worked, we wouldn't be where we are. So things like marches, although they look useful, it hasn't changed things. Letter writing, that doesn't mean don't do these things, but we have to look at the data. You know, workability is one of the most important things we talk about in ACT, and so far we're in the same position. So that means we have to do things differently. Firstly, I want to ask you, as I'm finished in the part of talking about where we are, now we're going to move to looking at young people and ourselves, and then moving into what we can do to help. But just pause for a moment. And in the chat, I want you to just talk about what were the difficult experiences that you noticed inside you as you went through that data. You would have seen in me that it was really hard to speak. It's really difficult. And so inside me, I feel all choked up, and my chest is heavy, and I actually feel a bit shaky. So I can't speak to you. This is a one-way thing, but I would really love it if you would put in the chat. No, actually, we might just put in the chat. I think is easier. Just put down in the chat what you noticed inside you as you watched that. If some people are willing to jump in. Thank you, Wendy. Despairing, angry, and ashamed. Thanks, Paul. It's really hard on a webinar, but we have to find a way on a webinar to be together. So your chats are really going to make a difference to all of us, so we don't sit here alone. Thank you. So I think you can all see the chat. Somebody said, isn't it, make sure you change your chat to all attendees, all panelists and attendees, so that everyone can see what you write. Paul has just told me. So you're only seeing a few people. So I'll read it out if you haven't read it. But so far, and please keep writing, and I'll write, make sure it says all panelists and all attendees. And I'll try to read out what you've written. I don't know that I can. Tears and tightness in the throat, feeling hopeless that nothing is going to be done at a government level. Heaviness and tightness in my chest. I felt a lot of tension in my jaw. Tears running down my face, a heavy blackness over my heart. I noticed sadness, a feeling that I'm not doing enough. Sadness and despair, a lump in my throat. My daughter is sitting next to me. And I feel sick with fear for her and all of us. uncertainty, vulnerability, panic, and frustration. So what you've just described, all of those things you've just described, and please feel free to keep writing them and we'll share it together so we get a sense that we're all in this place. What you've just described is the part that we call being a noticer. And in DNAV, I think the noticer is a really important place to work with young people. What you've just done in that little piece is just begin to write down the noticer experience that you have as you watch it. When we talk about the noticer with young people, it's what happens inside you, the senses, your feelings, your awareness of what's going on inside you, whether you're noticing things have changed, whether you feel a sense of threat, whether you feel a search for safety, a desperate need to kind of hunker down and be safe, and whether you turn away from your feelings. So these are the things that are inside the notice that we want to look at. And we're going to go, so this is us as individuals. We're also going to look at noticing as a group. And what we want to do is look at what happens to us as a group as we notice what goes on. So as I notice what you're all writing in the chat about how you feel, it makes me feel sad and overwhelmed, but it also makes me feel like somehow we're together in this. And that's actually what we want. Is we want first to be able to share our feelings so that young people can too. The next part of the model that I want you to think about is what we call your advisor. And this is a 4-process model. The noticer is just a word to describe all of the inner sensations inside your body. The advisor is just a word to describe the behaviours of talking to yourself, telling yourself what's going to happen, predicting. It's mostly a behaviour of predicting what the future is going to happen, or is going to be, or predicting what you can do. And I'm going to show you what I predict, if I could find my slide. So I wrote down here some of the things. I did this myself. And so I wrote down here, here's the notice of things that I experience: guilt, panic, loss of sleep, my heart races, turning away, despair, feeling that I want to hide out, sometimes being irritable, and a desperate search for safety. That's my noticer experience. My advisor experience is constantly questioning why people don't listen and why they don't do it. I mount internal arguments like, they should listen, they need to fix this, it's wrong, it's not fair. Why can't they change things and why can't I change things? I question my lack of action. I talk about why I shouldn't fly to places and how I need to not drive and all of these things as well. And I have disbelief, complete disbelief at politics. So what you see here inside this place that we call the advisor is you see what we try to do when we have all this noticing experience. So so here's a space for you to share as you watch that video. What were your beliefs and rules and judgments and evaluations around what you saw? And what is the advice you give yourself? Some of it's already come out. But in the chat space, put down some things that we would call your advisor. Do you ruminate? Do you blame yourself or blame other people? Or do you worry? Just take a moment to write down some things that happened to you. And just so you know where the webinar is going from there, when we write down things that happen to us. And I'll wait for you to write some things down in the chat, some self-talk that you have that fits with these beliefs, judgments, rules, evaluations, problem solving. Just write a few things that happened as we talked so far. Thank you, Paul. So I presume everyone can see what Paul has written. Yeah, how could they do it? I don't understand. It isn't us and them. We're going to move, once we do this we're basically kind of doing an assessment. This is very much the way I would do an assessment with a young person, is how do you talk to yourself? I should be able to fix this. It's time to take action. As you write those things in, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about what the advisor is about. It's all about problem solving and trying to fix a problem. And this is a problem that is way beyond anything that we can do alone. Yeah, Lindsay, I'm a bad mum for not doing more. I'm a bad person. Thank you for sharing that, because it's not just you. I'm not doing enough. I need to do more. I feel lost. And I do promise you, we will move to active hope and you will leave this webinar hopeful. But first we need to see where we're at. Feeling lost because there's no action. What are we going to do? It isn't fair. As you keep thinking about what I'm tired and I feel like giving up. And what I want you to notice as these come in, and I'm sure you're all reading them like I am, is we're adults. And for children, this is even harder. And so our job is to be aware of this, because not to make you cry or to make you feel the pain in the webinar, but we need to know what it's like and what they're facing. You can keep putting your advisor chat in the room as I continue. This is too much for our children. The next part of DNAV is the part we call a discoverer. And if we're doing an assessment, we would now want to look at the difficult patterns that we engage in. And what I mean by difficult patterns, I mean things that we do in response to what you've just seen and in response to what your advisor does and how you feel inside yourself. And then your advisor starts joining in with, we should do more, it's too big, I don't know what to do, I can't do this myself, I need help from others, I feel alone. All of the things you've written here. The next part, the discover, is what you actually do when all these things come up. And I'm going to share you my experience of what I do in this little one that I did before. And as you do, as you think about it, perhaps you can share some of the things so this is my DNAV, not on a good day. Right. So some of the things I do is workability. I don't test the workability of my actions. I get angry on Facebook and I spend too much time looking and reading the media. I get angry with what I see in the media and I just continue to wallow in it and see it and see it and see it. Sometimes I go on rants, either rants to my family or I rant to social media. I am passionate, but I don't, that says passion not used well. I'm passionate, but I don't use it well. And the strengths that I have inside this discovery space are not used to help me connect with what I care about. Instead, they're used as just like rage and venting and sometimes avoidance. There are times, I haven't written that in there, but there are times when I just turn everything off and I turn away. And so I'm going to continue to talk, but as we talk, I want you to write down and just be aware of some of the things you do. Like even just watching that little bit of video, I know that there would be a strong sense of wanting to turn it off and and some people thinking, why am I showing that? So in this little space, what we've done is a DNAV assessment. We haven't done the values piece yet. We're going to come back to that, but we know what our value is here. We all share the same earth. Around the outside of DNAV, we would do an assessment of the current situation. So my current situation is the fires in Australia, the constant bad news, and an increase in stress. The social and historical environment that surrounds DNAV is looking at the threat bias. This is my personal history. This is a threat bias that I have due to a childhood that had neglect. And so I have a very high threat bias and I tend to get outraged very quickly due to that threat. My family is important to me and my social networks are important to me. And self-view and social view are down here. My view of myself is sometimes I feel I'm alone and I feel shame, deep, deep shame, that we're in this place. It's like it's our fault. And in my social view over here, it's written here, but it's over here, I feel frustration that others are not attending, and frustrated with others, and frustrated even with people I love and care about because they're not doing anything. So this is a whole DNAV case conceptualisation. And while I was talking, I can see that some of you have written down the behaviours that you engage in what we would call low discoverer skills, shutting off from the big picture because that's all you feel you can do. So feel free to continue to write some of those things, those patterns of behaviour, so you get a sense of what you do that will help you understand what young people do. Okay, so now we're going to move into, that kind of gives you a sense of how to do a case conceptualisation and how to think about it. And of course, this is all about climate. And when we work with a young person, we're not just doing it on climate, we're doing it on the whole person. But I thought it would give us a sense of awareness and also a sense of healing of where we are and what we need to do. And you will get these slides so you can have a look as you go through. Okay. Take a moment to take a breath. I know that was a lot, but we need to face and tell it like it is. A really important part of knowing how to move forward. Firstly, we have a shared sense of value. And DNAV values are our centre because we feel like everything we do should be centred on our value. And so just think for a moment about what you care about the most. And I know it's our planet and the people that are here because you're here. And I can see people still writing their discoverer behaviours, and I hope you can all see them as I talk as well. I'll call them out too. Thanks, Lindsay, for writing down. I write frantic letters too, sign petitions, donate money. I do all those things. Okay, so I'm going to begin with what we care about is a really important thing. In DNAV, we tend not to use language like toward and away because we feel like values is a central part of all of us. Not that it's toward and away is wrong, it's just that we feel like values is our centre and we want to always bring it back to the centre. So, and around the outside of DNAV is the social view. And so I'm going to begin as a group and talk about what we care about. And I'm going to lean heavily on Paul Atkins. Paul is in the chat here on Paul Atkins' work in the prosocial world. We are a group species. And that's why we feel this so much. We're a group species. We care about our children, we care about our families, we care about the earth. And David Sloan Wilson he's one of the world's leading evolutionary scientists. And I think last year or the year before, he wrote a book called This View of Life. And in the book, This View of Life, he lays out how important it is for us as a group species to work in groups. Oh, I didn't change that slide. It says ACBS. But David talked about how as a group species, we have small groups and all of those small groups work up to work for the big group. So that we have to see ourselves as our small groups, our families are part of the world. So all small groups, our families move into our communities, our schools and our workplaces, and then we move into our states or our country, and then the world and humanity and this earth that is our home. And all of our behaviours inside our small groups, we need to maintain the whole big group vision as well. And that can be a really good thing to think about, that we are groups from our cellular level of groups all the way up to the earth. And so because we're such, because being a group species is so important to us and it's part of our evolutionary heritage, that if we're not part of a group that are committed to advancing a worthy cause, we often fail and we feel rejected and we don't know what to do. So I think this is an important way that you'll see as I talk of what's actually happening inside the work with how to help people in this current situation. And so I'm going to move into Prosocial and talk about Paul Atkins' work, Paul Atkins, Steve Hayes and David Sloan Wilson. I'm not going to describe Prosocial a lot. I'm just going to touch on it, and then we're going to come back to working with individual young people, and then we're going to come back to Prosocial and group behaviours. But I want to let you know it's here. So Prosocial came out of evolutionary science work, and also this lady here, Eleanor Ostrom. Eleanor Ostrom was a prize-winning Nobel laureate for coming up with core design principles for managing the commons. So she looked across the world at the ways in which small villages and communities and all different kinds of places where humans are. She looked at the way those groups manage their common resources. You know, like such as farmers, and how farmers who live in an agricultural society might manage their common property, or how a fishing industry might manage their fishing industry. And she came up with core design principles and said that effective groups fall into these patterns of behaviour. And Paul Atkins, this is Paul looking very happy there. This is Paul, has just published this book called Prosocial, along with Steve Hayes and David Sloan Wilson. And they have massaged the core design principles for us to use in an initiative called Prosocial. And so what we know is that young people can't face this alone. We can't face this alone. And the group is really important for us. And so effective groups have psychological flexibility. And so individual psychological flexibility. You and I both know what that means. It means the ability to do what you care about, even when your thoughts and feelings say it will be hard. Collective psychological safety, feeling like we're connected. I should have Paul describe this instead of me. But I don't know how to turn you on, Paul. So anyway, shared identity and purpose, equity in decision-making, inclusive decision-making, transparency, feedback, conflict resolution, group autonomy, and systems in the groups. I'm not going to describe this in detail, but we're going to come back to this in a little bit. So when we use DNAV, what we want to do is extend it out and think of what we call social view, and that is us as a group, and looking at how we as a group can make a difference. And the power, as I've done this work, I have found that the power of groups can change where we are, but it won't happen through traditional methods, okay? So what we want to do inside is begin with individuals, and then we're going to come back to social. So firstly, why is this so hard for us in terms of our noticer space? The outpouring in the chat, it was so hard for me to read, but it made me also feel like we're in the same boat. So our noticer experience, the behaviour of being what's going on inside us, is we're mammals. We've evolved to need safety and to detect danger. And right now we all have a heightened sense of threat. And young people have a heightened sense of threat. And they may not attribute this to climate change or to constant negative media. They might just be stressed. But in this webinar, we're talking particularly about climate. But I want you to think about when a young person comes in stressed or overwhelmed, that the climate stress is coming through to 4 in 5 young people. So even though they might not say it's about the climate, this is a context that's important. We want to do just what we've done, share and discuss their worries. We want to use just a little bit of data to show them that they're not alone. So you might, for example, talk to them about 4 in 5 young people are worried about this so that they know they're not alone. Or you might talk to them about how you're worried too. We need appropriate self-disclosure at a level that's appropriate to their age. So those videos that I showed in the beginning, it's not what I would show a client, but for us, we need to be able to be aware of it. And we really do need to tell it like it is and not whitewash it as it'll be okay. And if you're an adult working with a young person or have a young person in your family, they might not want to be part of a conversation because they might not want to experience what's going on inside them. And everyone is different at a different level. Some young people, they need to, for their development, just turn away and cope with it. As long as their turning away is not in the service of avoidance. If it's a functional thing and it helps them cope and they're still connected to their values and they're able to live their life, then that's okay. What we do know with young people as noticers is that they see the world with new eyes and they feel distress at where we are, and their emotions are much more heightened than ours. And so the skills we want to use to help them here, their skills are not hard. In that noticer space, we want to use awareness to help them bring into their awareness all of the experiences they might be having in response to the situation they're in. They might not connect that their increased level of stress and their increased level of worry or even fighting with family, they might not necessarily connect that that's related to this increased sense we have inside us. Focus on their body. Do the basic skills that we do, like learning how to pause and be aware and talk about what's going on inside you. Talk about fear and sadness. You can write it down if you want to inside that little disc that we sometimes use. And talk about the normality of what we want to do is sometimes hide and sometimes find a safe place. And sometimes just be with our family and not have the media and not talk about it. That's okay too. We want them to help the skills of just being aware of their body and to be able to pause and breathe. And we want them to be able to, I haven't written it down there, we want them to be able to talk about their feelings with words. I feel worried is enough. We need them to practice some self-care steps, like turning off the media sometimes, knowing when the triggers inside them say this is too much and I need some quiet time. Spend time with others is probably the most profound thing they can do. Meditation, exercise, yoga, all of the things that are inside your body to help you slow down. And for us adults, turn off the media sometimes. It's okay, it's a self-care thing. Consider how much you have television on in the house, if that's your family or the families of the young people we work with. Some young people's families I work with have the television on all of the time. So I encourage the families to have some quiet time and provide a safe space for the young people. It's okay to address the climate and to talk about it and to be proactive, but sometimes they just need a quiet time, a downtime where their families are just being a family. When it comes to what we call a social view, is using the noticer skills in a social context or in a group context, we want to think about allowing our experience and acting on them. So involving them in discussions around how they feel, using data to show that it's not just them that's concerned and acting, but other people are acting too. Sharing hopeful actions, we'll come to some of those soon. And creating opportunities to talk with family and friends. All of those things just have such an important way of helping us to feel connected and to feel calmer in ourselves. This is probably a good time for me to ask you some questions and for you to share a little bit of what's happening for you so far. It's really difficult on a webinar. I really wish I could hear your voices, but just any comments or questions that you want to make. Sarah has a question. Sarah, you said, I'm wondering where the data comes from that you presented. When you get the slides, all of the underlined are hyperlinks. So it's all, you just click on the data and you'll get it. The data on young people is from the APS, if that's what you're referring to, Sarah. So every slide, if you see an underline, it's actually a hyperlink, but it's the format of the slides that it doesn't look like it. So let's just get a sense of where you're at so far in the webinar and what you want to ask before I proceed. If you've got any questions to ask, you can just put them in the chat or you can ask them in the question and answer. It's okay. Just in the chat's fine too. I'll move along, but if you've got a question, ask it. Lindsay, what do I do if I know other clinicians avoid discussion of climate change with their clients or minimise it? That's an interesting question, Lindsay. I think we can only speak from our place and we need to bring people along with us. Paul might have something to say here in terms of prosocial, but if you think about the way clinicians work alone with their clients, I think our discussion with them cannot be about what they do with their clients, but it can be about our experience of us and them as clinicians together and finding a way to have a shared discussion where we listen to each other and share some information. And I think that shared sense of purpose of what we have for our clients is the place where we can start. So finding a shared sense of two clinicians working together and hearing each other's views is a good place to start. Unless you're supervising them and worried that they're minimising it with their clients, I think that what you could do is show them the data, we show them the webinar. Perhaps not this beginning webinar because it's got some heavy stuff in it, but there is good data you'll see at the end, like the APS have produced young people in the climate and best practice for young people in the climate. So there's some things like that. Thanks, Paul. Paul has said it seems to be about a real conversation with other clinicians focusing on shared purpose. Seems like a good suggestion. We have tricky jobs, we're alone. What I do know is this, and I'll come back to your question a little bit more in a second, Lindsay. We're going to move into listening to our self-talk, what we call your advisor. You can call it anything you want, but self-talk doesn't have the diffusing effect that we really want. Advisor is like, this is me and my advisor, and tends to have a little bit more of a diffusing effect. The data seem relentless, and this is terrible for our language-able minds. Like the primary job of language is survival. And when we're facing the biggest threat we've ever faced, many people will just turn away because they can't face it. And so what I do know, and this comes to your question, Lindsay, is you cannot fight someone's advisor. You cannot beat them over the head and say, you're right and I'm wrong. Not that I'm suggesting you would, but we do this with clients too. When clients get dug in with what they believe is right, actually telling them that they are wrong is not going to help. So when we're looking with young people, we want to first hear the ways that they question. And what I like to do when I'm talking about the advisor with young people is I want to hear the way they blame others or make judgments and evaluations against others, like it's their fault and they need to do this differently and they need to do this right, or how they blame themselves, like it's my fault and I should be doing more and I should be doing different. And when you put before your advisor information, there is a lot of what we should be doing. Right? Before, when I asked you to put down what your advisor tells you, there was a lot of I need to do this and I need to do that and I'm not doing enough. With young people, I see something different. With young people, I see them say it's their fault. There's lots of blame of other people, not just around climate, but it tends to be a general thing I see with young people who are struggling psychologically, is there's often a lot of blame towards others. And that's fine. It's just good to get it out there. It's not wrong to get it out there. And the first thing we want to do is not fight someone's advisor. What we want to do is build their skills. So we want to first normalise that our advisor's job is to keep us safe, right? To keep us safe. And so in the face of this big thing, we want everyone to see, and we want everyone to find a way to keep us safe. And that's a normal thing. When we find ourselves deeply stuck inside rumination or overthinking, we want to pause Be aware, step away and think, what is my advisor doing here? Its job is to keep me safe. It's like my friend. Or my advisor is constantly yelling at me to do more. But sometimes I need to step away from that and go, this is about panic and feeling threat and feeling to keep safe. And sometimes I just need to pause for a bit and think about what I care about here. Some things that are really helpful with young people is creating new rules around what's going on. The most profound new rule that I've seen that works for me personally is Greta Thunberg's, you're never too small to make a difference. Now, these are not just platitudes when we talk about rules. We're actually talking about rules that are supported by action. So Greta Thunberg making a rule that says you're never too small to make a difference. She's a little girl who made a difference. And she's not alone. And you're going to see that in just a minute. There are millions of people making a difference. Millions. So we want to create some new rules. So where your advisor says this is terrible, it'll never change, the world is going to finish, we don't want to dispute that or fight it. We just want to make a space for understanding that your advisor's job is to keep you safe and look out for danger, and that's what's happening there. And we can make some new rules, like I can make some action. I can go to a webinar. Perhaps a new rule, I can give my fellow clinicians some information. When we have rules, we want to test out the helpfulness of the rule. So when we have a rule like nothing can be done, we don't want to challenge it, like cognitively challenge it, but we want to test it out with experience and look at the experience of what's happening and see if our experience is consistent with our rule. If you were Greta Thunberg and you're not, where you might have a rule like nothing can be done, you want to actually see if that rule still works for you. Now, there's something that's really important when I talk about the advisor, and that is the advisor is the behaviour of prediction instead of trial and error, working out what's going to happen next, beliefs and rules and judgments. It's just a word to describe that. And the research shows that as we grow older, we become less likely to adopt unfamiliar hypotheses. I think it's a really important thing to think about in terms of climate change. So this is experimental data from Alice Gopnik. And Alice Gopnik found that as we grow older, we're less likely to adopt an initially unfamiliar hypothesis, even if it's consistent with the evidence. Think about that. Even if the evidence says the planet is warming, sometimes, for some people, as they get older, they're less likely to see that because they will stay with what they know. And the way that they change is through the group changing, not through, and the groups around them changing. That group effect is really powerful here. And so there is, if you look across the developmental stage, there is a critical window, 2 critical windows in which we are more likely to adopt unfamiliar things that are unfamiliar to our way of thinking. One is toddler years, where a 4-year-old can think they're Batman. And the other window is in the adolescent period. There's a window in the adolescent period where flexibility of adopting new ideas is really at its highest. And so that's why in young people you see outrage at where we're at, and you see passion, and you see them able to look at things differently. And that happens in our home with young people that we love and care about, and also with young people that we work with where they want to try to change things. And as we get older, there's a tendency to be more likely to use our advisor to tell us what to do, even if the evidence doesn't support us. Now, there's some evolutionary work that suggests that that's part of our evolutionary heritage, that elders had stories and it was passed on with an oral tradition, and so they needed to remember the stories, so such as where the water is. Young people can adopt new rules. Paul says, I love the idea of creating new rules. One that has been profound for me is nobody is more or less important than me. That's a beautiful rule. Does anybody else have a new rule that you've got, or a little rule that you help yourself in these times? They're incredibly powerful if you start thinking about them and working on them for young people and for ourselves. I use Greta's. I use "you're never too small to make a difference." Every action has an effect. Nice. Every action does have an effect, Lindsay. Local communities can create powerful change. Oh, this is beautiful. So where we want to act is discover your power. In that discovery space, keep putting your rules out while I talk. In that discovery space, we want to help. This climate change thing is not a place for advisors and notices. It's a place for the discoverer. So the discoverer is a class of behaviours, the group of behaviours that we call trial and error, trying things out and seeing what happens. The advisor saves you from trial and error because you know that's not going to work. The discover is about, what happens if I try this? That's actually what I was doing with this webinar today. And let me just tell you, I got almost no sleep last night because I was so worried about doing a good job on this webinar that my advisor was going crazy. And this webinar was all about a discover action of me just deciding, well, I need to do something. So in the discoverer, when you're working with young people, you're looking for their patterns of behaviour, or ourselves. You want to look at whether they're able to test workability. Is this thing I'm doing working for me? Track with like a functional assessment, their antecedent behaviour consequence. Look for ways in which they're using their strengths. And an important thing is to use your strengths in the service of value. Sometimes our strengths become behaviours that we've such a well-learned repertoire of behaviours that we actually can use them in the service of not value, in the service of making our lives safe rather than leading to what we care about. We want to look for impulsivity, avoidance, and acting out. And then what we want to flip to is the skill side. So if you think of the discoverer, you have a low skill and a high skill. It's like a continuum, arbitrary, but that's the way we do it. We do that the same with advisor. You have a low skill and high skill. It's a continuum, and the same with noticer. So discover skills. Asking young people, try a first action step. Join an online group. Join a webinar. Watch 2040. Read a blog. If you haven't watched 2040, I highly recommend it. It's filled with hope. Filled with hope. Maybe the action is small, just like talking to a family or looking after another person. Test the new action for vitality. Did it work? Did it help to build vitality? Build their strengths and discuss the strengths of the group involvement and how they build and connect towards their value. And I'm going to talk about some of these groups like Student Climate Action and Extinction Rebellion in a minute. Even getting creative, art, cooking, dancing, singing, improv, planting. The important thing is that the thing that you do doesn't actually have to save the planet. And there's a really important thing inside here that I've learned with the Discoverer. So in 2015, I was in the earthquakes in Kathmandu. That was around the time that we were developing DNAB. And in the middle of chaos and crisis, where people had lost their houses, where people had nowhere to live, 10,000 people died, people did small things like gave a neighbour a bag of rice. And when you give a neighbour a bag of rice, even if they don't have a house, when you do a small thing like that, you suddenly feel like you're empowered. You have a sense of agency. It's like self-determination. You have a sense that you can do something, and that changes things. So when you're working with young people who are distressed, even about life or the climate, the Discover is a really important thing to take action in a small step. But when you take action in a small step with the climate, it's really powerful. I'm loving these little rules that you're sending. Barb, remember, from little things, big things grow. That's very beautiful. Almost makes me cry reading those little rules. Discover a social view. So social view is just looking at the discoverer from all of us, not just me alone, but all of us together. Experiencing first action steps is the same. Share what that, but doing it together, sharing it with a person. Like, I do encourage you to watch 2040 as a very hopeful thing. Share what is there and what you see rather than doing it alone. Share your ideas and share your sadness. Test out the new action to see if it makes you more vital as a group. Build your strengths as a group. Do these things as a group, and parents, consider your choices in how your choices can influence your group, such as your banking, your retirement fund, your electricity. Tell your kids and your family that you're moving things so that they can see it's not just students striking. It's us too. We're all doing it together. As soon as you get a sense of we're all in this together, it changes everything. For younger kids, you can do little things like make a dashboard of greener actions and put it on the fridge, things that you're doing. And Barb wrote a small street play to share their message, very powerful. Young people, the physicality of the street. That's lovely, Barb. The physicality of the street is beautiful. These discover skills are really important. And then the stepping into the discover space as a group or an individual, but I think the group is the most important here. It builds active hope. You can see that, Barb, in your little example here of kids making a street play. Things that have active hope for us as adults. Extinction Rebellion is the word Extinction Rebellion, I kind of wasn't really sure about that, but when you dig into what Extinction Rebellion have been doing, it's quite incredible. And I'm going to come back to them in a little bit. But for adults, if you're a professional, the Australian Parents Climate Action Group, really powerful things. Australian psychologists declaring a climate emergency. Prosocial that Paul talked about. Thriving Adolescent, our Facebook group. Right now, today, there is a bill for climate change in Australia. There is a summit coming next weekend, a 2-day summit that you can join online. So as adults, there are so many things that are really hopeful. We are making a difference, and it is the power of the people that's going to make a difference here. We cannot wait for science, and we cannot wait for the politicians. We need the science, but we can't wait for the way that traditional message has been put out, is what I mean. Science is very, very important, but that traditional message needs to change. Active hope for young people. All of these underlined are hyperlinks. Fridays for Future. Stop the fossil fuel agenda is there. Stop the fossil fuel agenda is the main action of Fridays for Future. They have online groups. Even for the quietest young person, they can start looking and seeing hope. They have the Students' Climate Strike, Extinction Rebellion, Australian Youth Climate Coalition, Australian Youth Justice, You Go Greta, 58,000 members. Now, when you go online to these places, here's Extinction Rebellion. What you see in here is they are a group. The rough guide of Extinction Rebellion's principles. They stand in solidarity that we need to change. They have a central unified strategy, and their strategy is disruption, non-violent disruption. So what they're saying is that the traditional ways haven't worked. We need disruption, and do it in a non-violent way. They want to plant the seeds for change. They have inclusivity and everyone is involved. They have fun, so when they do something, it includes dancing and theatre and cooking and making clothes and craft and a whole thing. Everyone has a role. It's inclusive for everyone. You can do it online or you can join a group locally. They're a web, not a hierarchy. There's no one is the boss. They're a web and they're all here for one shared purpose. And so if you look inside the things that they do, you will see things like, and this is such a powerful thing that you can help a young person with. So on February the 14th, it's Valentine's Day, they're writing a love letter to the earth. There is training everywhere, group involvement everywhere. And it's not just Extinction Rebellion. If you look at this is the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. They have training online. This is an online skills development that anybody can join for free and sit at home and do an online skills development. And every single one of these things is going to help a young person feel like they're more involved. And of course, some young people will want to just not take any action and just live their life. And that is okay too. I said, okay, and so some people are adding some more. A regenerative culture is a big focus for XR. Yes, it is. And Extinction Rebellion. And Barb has said, social workers for climate action. Thank you, Barb. We'll share all these chats and links. So there is a lot to be said about a group. This is the regenerative cycle of Extinction Rebellion. I didn't want to talk too much about Extinction Rebellion, but they are a really important group to see how a group can change. As are the important groups Fridays for Future and the Student Climate Strike in Australia, if you're an Australian. So active hope happens in a group. And just pause for a minute. I don't know about you, but I'd like to know, do you already feel a little more hopeful than before? Has it changed? Just stepping into that discover space and starting to go, okay, what can we do? And then starting to talk about the groups and the action that's being around. Like there is a huge summit coming up and a huge call for a climate change bill, and groups like Extinction Rebellion that they were the catalyst for the UK to declare a climate emergency. And the students' climate strikes is so powerful. They can have active hope by just getting information. Just getting information. Thanks, Lindsay. I'm glad you're excited. I get so too. Just getting information. For example, if you look at the 2040 website, watch the doco, but if you look at the 2040 website, it talks about the 5 things that we most need to do, and it provides solutions for those 5 things. And if the doco is correct in the data, and it seems to be, we already know how to do it. What we need to do is convince the powers to be. There's things like some of the 5 most important things are empowerment of women and girls. We all have a role in that to play as well. Marine regeneration, regenerative agriculture, renewable energy, and a circular economy. Things that can all be done and are well within our framework. Online education, this is from the 2040 website. You can go and do some online education and just learn some stuff as a kid. Learn some things and begin to build active hope. You can have hope in the home. Small things that can be hopeful in the home. Making time for yourself. That's really important. If you are more of an activist, maybe your family don't want to be activists sometimes. Maybe you have some young people who just need to be practicing self-care and strategies. And that would involve being able to see the stress, talk about the stress, and then step aside from it and practicing these things instead. The United Nations Act Now, steps at home. Right, we can all do this. 5-minute showers, bring your own bag, drive less, turn your lights off, buy local produce, have more meat-free meals, recycle, refill and reuse, unplug, and have zero waste fashions. These are all things we can do. And 633,000 people are talking about it. Oh, Marissa, that's lovely to read this. I moved from hopelessness to thinking about all the things I can do at home. Absolutely, you can. You can. There's so much we can do. And I think that hopelessness, I think we have to tell it like it is, and we have to face where we are in order to accept that we need to do something. Paul, a tech Sabbath. That is so cool. Last night we agreed as a family to have a tech Sabbath, Saturday night to Sunday night. I wanted to make sure it was not about less tech, but more reading, more relaxation. That's wonderful. And as a group, that's nurturing your young people and giving them time out from the stress of life. Joining groups to defend the planet together, eating it. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful, Sarah. Okay, so things we can do at home. And these, if you've got small kiddos, these are steps that you can take with young kids to make them feel like they're doing something. You go to this Act Now website from the United Nations, you can print out stuff, put it on your fridge, do it as a shared group if you've got little kids. I love this. The United Nations, there's all the links are here. The United Nations Steps for Sustainable Development. You can start at level 1, things you can do from your couch. Stop your paper bank statements. Small things you can do. You can go from level 1 all the way to level 4, and you can be a sofa superstar. And all of these things will make a difference. And they make a difference to us feeling like we can take action. We can't let go of the idea that the real action is politics, is changes to policy, declaring climate emergencies, and having our governments and media talk about it. But when we do small actions, it builds to bigger actions. You can, if you want to, measure your carbon footprint. And as a family, track your carbon footprint if you wanted to do that. You can do those things. And what I want to come back to is the idea that everything you do makes a difference. And you get to decide what kind of difference you make. And our advisor, our self-talk, is always going to tell us that we cannot change, that it's terrible, that it's over, because its job is about survival. And that's always going to happen. But when we start to step into these small actions, and you even see it in the chat here today, which is just beautiful for me to see, when you start thinking about what small thing can I do? Maybe I can strike on a Friday with the students. As soon as you start stepping into that space, things open up in a way that you can have the despair and the sorrow, and you can also think about where you're doing things. That's me today. Tomorrow I might be back in outrage, but that's okay. So we're going to have time for a little bit of chat conversation. I wish we had people conversation. But where we're going to move to now is to think about, I'm not going to ask you to think about what action you take at home. That's for you to decide. But if you want it, Paul and I had a conversation yesterday. Paul was very generous with his time, and we had a conversation. And we talked about whether we want to use their Prosocial platform. They have a wonderful Prosocial platform, which is kind of looks a bit Facebooky in terms of like a Facebook group, but doesn't have the disadvantages of being in a Facebook group. And we discussed whether we might create a group so that we can, from this webinar, begin to support each other and see what happens. There's lots of groups. There's so many groups, and you saw them all here earlier in the webinar. There's so many groups that we can jump on and be involved in. Fridays for Future, Student Climate Strike, Extinction Rebellion, Australian Youth Coalition, and then there's adult groups. The Australian Parents Action Group is a really good one. So the question we kind of wondered is, do we want to, as helpers, behavioural scientists, think about continuing this conversation that we're having? You know, maybe if we did, we might find ways to address things like Lindsay's question. Like, what do you do if you work with people who say the climate is not important? So at the end of this webinar, I'm going to send you out some links. You'll get the PowerPoint presentation, and all of these things you can just follow the link, all of the underlined things. And so you'll get a little poll as well. And in that poll, I want to ask you is, do you want to join a group and continue to be part of the conversation? Or is it this enough and you just want to go off and do your thing, maybe join other groups and be involved? Personally, I'd love to continue the conversation with like-minded people. But I'm also aware that there's lots of groups too, so it's kind of a tricky balance. If you want to find out more about Prosocial, go to prosocialworld.com. Oh, there you go, Paul's put the link. If you join the DNAV mailing list on our website, dnav.com, a little pop-up comes up, you'll get some more access to free resources as we develop them with DNAV. And if you're new to DNAV as a developmental model of ACT and you want to know more about the science, you can find it here at that link too. And so we're a little bit, maybe I'll just show you this. I want to show you this little video that I think kind of helps us think about changing the story. And I see it as one of hope for the earth, actually. And I hope that you see it that way too. And maybe you've seen it before, but it's about what the earth actually has that we don't have.
Some call me nature. Others call me Mother Nature. I've been here for over 4.5 billion years. 22,500 times longer than you. I don't really need people, but people need me. Yes, your future depends on me. When I thrive, you thrive. When I falter, you falter. Or worse. But I've been here for eons. I have fed species greater than you, and I have starved species greater than you. My oceans, my soil, my flowing streams, my forests, they all can take you or leave you. How you choose to live each day, whether you regard or disregard me, doesn't really matter to me. One way or the other. Your actions will determine your fate, not mine. I am nature. I will go on. I am prepared to evolve. Are you?
I hope that, like me, you see that as as a message of hope. Be prepared to evolve. That's all we need to do. And I feel a sense of hope that the world will continue. And I feel that that we have reached a change in the way people are seeing this. And every single day I turn on my social media and there's a new group and a new action and a new report and a new thing, and we are changing, but we can't stop. So I'm just going to finish this little part with DNAV, and then we've kind of got 10 minutes for questions if you want to. So if I was going to do a treatment plan for me, this is just as a way of thinking about it for you, with my advisor, I would become aware of my rumination. I'd pause and I would step into my noticer. I'd build new rules for myself, such as some things I do are useful, or I'm never too small to make a difference. I would say that my voice matters, even when there's a part of me that says it's not important. I would pause and I would remember that my advisor will be on alert because that's its job, to help me. I would use my noticer to name my feelings, to breathe, to share them with other people, to connect with people, to be aware of my own threat response, to meditate and to walk. I would use my discoverer to commit to some actions that I'm willing to take, not what other people want to take or what I want to take. Join a group for the climate, run this webinar, write to professional groups, continue to write to MPs, strike with the students when I can. From my view of myself, whenever I start saying I should have done something and I feel shame, I would remind myself that it's not my fault. We're in this together. And when it comes to a social view, my action will be to try hard to connect with others, to, even though I'm an introvert and want to stay home, to join, share, have fun, and trust that we are all working to change this. So that's how we would do a treatment plan. And we've got time for questions. Thanks, Sarah. I'm glad you enjoyed it. You have no idea how nervous I was about this webinar. Funny, I just came from a keynote to 300 people in Iceland, and this was far more nerve-wracking than that. And I think it's because it's the topic and I care about it. Any other questions that you'd like to ask? Please ask away. Stefan. If discovery is the behaviour of trial and error, climate change is a slow process. Example, smoking causes cancer, yes. How can we test new behaviours that will make a climate difference? Results will not show until much, much later. Would the delay in reinforcement result in punishing the behaviour? Stefan, you are right. That is one of the problems that we can have. And so Stefan's question is climate change is slow. How can we test new behaviours that will make a climate difference? Results will not show until much, much later. And would the delay in reinforcement result in punishing the behaviour? I think that I'm going to answer that as a few pieces there. Firstly, yes, climate change is a slow process. That's how we got here. And we mostly got here because we weren't able to bring it into our awareness. And one of the things we know about evolution and the way we adapt is if it's not in our awareness, things happen to us instead of us driving evolution. So we will adapt to anything. We will adapt to a planet that's being cooked. The only way we can change that is to be aware of it. And that's the first step in evolution, is we can drive it if we use it in our awareness. And so that's the first part of your question. Now, the problem that we have is some people will rely too much on what their advisor tells them, on their pre-learning history, and they won't see that the evidence is there. That's why we're in this position where it's taken us so long. And so I think that the group effect changes and makes it reinforcing. So I think all of this stuff that I see in the groups that I've become involved in, and that group action, even if I'm not involved, the group action I see people taking and families taking. We have a wonderful ACT trainer in New South Wales, Louise Shepherd, and I see her doing actions like taking her 2 little girls and baking cupcakes and selling them to give the money to Greenpeace. And when I see that, it reinforces me that we're all taking action. So I think the delay in reinforcement is not there, because the reinforcement, in my opinion, comes from watching your group, you as a group, become together and connect together and see that things are happening. That's my thoughts. Paul has said, science can show us short-term changes. Imagine if in the news we saw a dashboard of key indicators. Yeah, that's a great comment, Paul. In some of the schools in, I can't remember the state, I feel like it's Iowa, but I could be wrong. There's a couple of states in the US where in the classrooms they have a dashboard, and it's a climate dashboard or an energy dashboard, and it shows how much energy the school is using and all of the ways they're contributing to a carbon footprint. And the students learn and watch it, and they change their behaviour to suit the dashboard. And there's some countries across the world where climate education is compulsory, part of the system, and they must learn about the climate and the changes. That's not the case in Australia, although I know they're not just Australians here. And Paul said, I could not agree more with the importance of the groups. Most of the changes we make to respond to climate also improve our community. Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's the group is going to be the most powerful here, not the individual. Thanks, Lindsay. Oh, you live in a remote area. I hope that this webinar has been useful. I'm loving watching your comments. Thank you. Lindsay, you said young people that come to see you don't talk about climate change. I think young people don't always talk about climate change. And that's okay. I'm not necessarily going to talk to them about it if they don't talk about it. But I think the important thing is to think about their increased level of threat and stress. So they might not be talking about climate change or thinking about climate change, but they can have an increased level of threat and stress. Just like we as adults sometimes might have relationship problems if we're stressed, and the stress is related to our work, but it impacts in our relationship. I think that's something that we kind of need to think about. So you don't always need to talk about the climate, but if the data from the Australian Psychological Society is correct, and I believe it is, 4 in 5 young people say they're stressed about the climate. So even though they don't talk to you about it, it's a factor. And so I think it's worth kind of having a little bit of discussion about whether they are exposed to some of the climate awareness and how they feel about that. And if they say, no, I'm okay, I don't care about it, then that's fine. But if they say, oh yeah, I'm a bit worried about it, then we can just kind of have a little conversation, it's fine. And especially the conversation about being discoverers and finding how action can change. Any other questions? Oh, I can't tell you how pleased I am to get to the end of this webinar. I have no idea. This is probably the most stressful thing I've done, and I don't know why, except that maybe it's just that I care about it a lot. Thanks, Melanie. Good luck with your going off to the New South Wales bushfire recovery. So we'll send you some post information, and if you want to connect up, we'll do that. And please do follow some of those links and find your tribe, find your group, find a way of feeling like you're being heard. Whether it's there's hundreds of groups across the world doing things, and that can help us feel that we can be active with our hope. Thank you. Thanks very much. I really appreciate your time. And we'll send this as a link out and send it to the link and send you the follow-up data and maybe a little questionnaire. Thank you. See ya. And now I'm just sitting here reading the thank yous as people log out. But thank you very much.